I always knew I didn't belong in the family. Some kids are born into warmth, encouraged, nurtured, celebrated. I was born into performance metrics and quarterly reviews. My parents, Richard and Lillian Caldwell, weren't just tech entrepreneurs, they were Silicon Valley legends. Founders of Caldwell Systems, pioneers of enterprise encryption and data architecture. The kind of people who made keynote speeches at TED and got invited to private conferences in Davos. The world saw brilliance. I saw pressure that my name is Aaron Caldwell. I'm 34. And I've spent most of my life learning how to be invisible. Marcus, my older brother, was always the golden child. From the moment he could form coherent sentences, my parents had him slotted in as heir apparent. By age 10, he was pitching app ideas. By 16, he'd been shadowing my father's board meetings. Ruthless, precise, and polished, Marcus was everything they valued. Me. I collected rocks, that wasn't an exaggeration. I had a notebook full of soil samples and used to sneak off during family vacations to explore cliffs and caves. I didn't want to code. I wanted to understand how the planet worked, how energy moved, how we could live better, not just faster. I thought they'd be proud of me when I got into UC Berkeley's environmental science program. My mother's response: "We don't need another activist in the family." So no, I wasn't expecting a parade when my parents died. But I wasn't expecting to be erased. That IT happened fast. One minute, they were flying back from a venture summit in Zurich. The next, their private jet lost contact over the Rockies. Wreckage was found 2 days later. No survivors. The memorial service was a showcase. Industry leaders, former presidents, and tech titans flew in. Marcus stood at the front of the cathedral in a tailored suit, thanking donors to the Caldwell Foundation before the incense had even cleared. I wore black slacks and a blouse they wouldn't have approved of, my fingers clenched around a speech I never got to read. Then came the reading of the will. It was held in our family's corporate legal office, top floor, panoramic views of San Francisco's skyline, like the universe had to remind me how small I was. Marcus sat with his lawyer, cool and composed, as the estate attorney read through the documents. The company shares. All to Marcus. The Barren estate, the Tahoe property, the Manhattan penthouse. Marcus. The art, the patents, the offshore accounts. Marcus and me. A folder was passed across the table. Inside, a single-page deed, notarized and signed, for 320 acres of land in Yavapai County, Arizona. Accompanied by a brief letter in my father's handwriting: "Aaron, this land is yours. You always saw the world differently. Maybe you'll see something there no one else ever could." Dad, it felt like a slap. A poetic one, maybe, but a slap nonetheless. The entire family empire, built on code and capital, and I got dirt. Actual, literal dirt. I glanced at Marcus. He was smirking. "You could always open a yoga retreat," he said, his voice just loud enough for the others to hear. A few of the attorneys chuckled awkwardly. I didn't respond. I just nodded, folded the deed, and left the room. For days, I tried to make sense of it. I rented a motel room off Highway 101, too drained to return to my apartment in Oakland. My phone buzzed non-stop with condolences from distant relatives and polite corporate messages from board members I barely knew. I ignored them all. I stared at the ceiling, at the patterns in the cheap popcorn texture, and tried to decide whether to fight, but what was I fighting for? Marcus had won. He always had. I'd spent my life pretending I didn't care, but this was the final confirmation. My parents had made their decision. I wasn't part of the legacy, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to sell the land. It wasn't valuable, not on the surface. I googled the coordinates, nothing but a dead zone on satellite view. Scrub desert, a few rocky outcrops, and a dilapidated structure that looked like an abandoned barn. No nearby infrastructure. No town for miles, but I kept coming back to the letter: "Maybe you'll see something there no one else ever could." Why those words? Why that land? Eventually, curiosity won. I booked a one-way flight to Prescott and rented a pickup truck. The drive took hours. The pavement gave way to dirt roads. Cell service disappeared. Civilization faded into the background until it was just me, the sun, and the open land. When I arrived, I expected to feel angry. Or empty. But instead, I felt unsettled. The land wasn't just barren, it felt paused. Like something had once been here, and then forgotten. There was a rusted fence that had once marked a boundary. I almost turned around. That first week out there was brutal. The Arizona heat was a relentless, unblinking monster, and the silence of the desert was a kind of noise all its own, pressing, humming, constant. The trailer creaked at night like it was alive. My solar generator barely kept the fan going, and I hadn't slept well in days. I kept asking myself, what are you doing here, Aaron? I could have been anywhere else. And honestly, I wanted to be. But every time I packed a bag, ready to call it quits, some flicker of memory or curiosity, pulled me back. That it was a photo that did it. I found it tucked behind a stack of geological charts, hidden in a folder so brittle it crumbled at the edges when I touched it. It showed my grandfather, Richard Caldwell Sr., standing in front of a corrugated metal warehouse with a clipboard in hand, squinting into the sun like he saw something the rest of us missed. He wasn't wearing a lab coat or suit like in the old company photos. Just jeans, dusty boots, and a determination that felt strangely familiar. That warehouse still stood, not 50 yards from the trailer. From the outside, it looked like a carcass, partially collapsed, vines creeping up one wall, the roof half torn by storms. But something about it looked intentional. Like it wasn't just storage. I'd assumed it was filled with scrap or forgotten tools, but that photo pushed me to pry it open. It took a crowbar, 2 hours, and a lot of swearing, but I finally forced the rusted door open. The inside smelled like time itself, dust, oil, metal, and something else. Like secrets. Shafts of sunlight pierced through holes in the ceiling, catching the floating dust in golden beams. At first glance, it was just a mess. Piles of boxes, rusted equipment, a toppled shelf. But then I found the desk. The desk was old, oak, and surprisingly intact. And beneath it, in a metal cabinet sealed with a half-broken padlock, was everything: maps. Soil surveys. Drilled core samples sealed in plastic tubes. Handwritten notes in a sharp, deliberate script I recognized from my childhood science fair ribbons. My grandfather's writing. He'd mapped the entire region. Not just our land, but surrounding parcels. The charts were meticulous, showing mineral concentrations, fault lines, and most crucially, traces of cobalt. That word was everywhere. Highlighted. Circled. Underlined. Cobalt. I hadn't thought about cobalt much since college. Back then, I'd written a thesis on rare earth minerals and their role in clean energy. Cobalt was critical, used in nearly every lithium-ion battery powering electric vehicles, mobile devices, and backup power systems. The demand had been soaring for years, outpacing supply, with mining dominated by unstable markets overseas. The U.S. had long been desperate for domestic sources, and here it was. A potential reserve buried beneath a forgotten plot in the Arizona desert. I sat on the concrete floor, holding a soil sample tube between my fingers, heart racing. My mind reeled. Did Marcus know? Did my parents? Why hadn't they developed it? Then I saw the last dated note in my grandfather's journal. Too risky. Company pressure. Let it rest. Maybe someday, someone with vision. That's when it hit me. They didn't forget this land. They buried it. Too many liabilities, too far outside the company's direction. But he didn't want it lost. He wanted someone to find it when the time was right. I wasn't discarded. I was chosen. The next few days were a blur. I scanned every document, uploaded the surveys, and double-checked the mineral data with some old geology textbooks. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: this land was potentially worth hundreds of millions in unextracted cobalt, maybe more, depending on purity and depth. I drove into town and rented the only halfway decent motel room with Wi-Fi. From there, I started researching mining consultants, environmental lawyers, and mineral rights experts. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call anyone I knew in the valley. This wasn't about family anymore. It was bigger than that, but before I did anything, I had to verify it, so I called Rachel Whitaker. Rachel and I went to Stanford together. She was one of those quiet geniuses, top of our geology class, always 2 steps ahead of the professors. We'd lost touch after school, but I found her email attached to a research article about cobalt recovery techniques in arid climates. She was working with a nonprofit studying sustainable mining. I sent her a message with a few scanned survey samples and asked her to give me a call. She called that night. Erin Caldwell, she said, laughing. Of all the people I expected to hear from, what's this about cobalt in Arizona? I told her everything. She didn't even hesitate. 2 days later, she flew out on her own dime. We camped on the land together, went through the maps, took fresh samples, and tested them using a portable spectrometer she brought. The readings made her whistle low. This is real, she said, running her fingers through the red-brown dirt. Not just traces. If your grandfather's surveys hold up across the property. Erin, this is a strategic reserve. That night, under the stars, we talked about what it could be. Not just a mining site, but a clean tech hub. Sustainable extraction, processing, maybe even battery prototyping on site. A new model for mineral development. One not built on exploitation, but innovation. I told her I didn't want to use the Caldwell name. Not yet. She nodded. Better that way. You don't want Marcus sniffing around. The next morning, I started making calls. I didn't have a company. I didn't have capital. But I had vision. And I had the land. This was the moment I stopped seeing it as a betrayal. I stopped seeing it as a punishment. I wasn't going to sell this land to some mining conglomerate looking to tear it apart and disappear. I was going to build something new. Something better. The first thing I did was disappear. Not physically, I was still out in Arizona, sleeping in the trailer when I wasn't driving between state offices and geological labs, but legally, on paper, I vanished. No more Erin Caldwell attached to anything important. With Ethan's help, I built a firewall of shell companies, layered trusts, and non-disclosure agreements so tight they'd make a CIA agent sweat. The land was transferred to a holding LLC registered in Delaware. The new company, Solaris Corp, was born through another vehicle registered offshore. My name was nowhere near it. It had to be that way. Because if Marcus, or anyone in the valley, got wind that I was behind a mining startup, especially one sitting on a critical mineral deposit, they'd bury me in litigation before I could even break ground. My last name had always opened doors. Now it had to stay locked away. Rachel was my first real ally. She stayed in Arizona, working out of a makeshift lab we set up in a refurbished shipping container. She handled the geological end, validating the data, running surveys, compiling reports. I handled the vision. And then came Ethan Liu. My best decision, hands down. I'd met Ethan at a sustainability conference years ago. He'd given a talk on asset protection for green tech startups and managed to make legal jargon sound like poetry. When I reached out, he didn't even blink. I assume this is a ghost client situation, he asked during our first call. You assume correctly. We set up a rotating board. Dummy directors. Burner emails. Every investor contract filtered through intermediaries. If anyone tried to trace the money or ownership, they'd get dizzy before hitting a wall of anonymous filings and cross-jurisdictional red tape. With the legal structure in place, I started pitching. Rachel and I compiled a presentation, soil data, projected cobalt yields, sustainable extraction models, and a 10-year development roadmap. But the real hook? A domestic supply chain for lithium-ion battery materials, built from the ground up in America. Ethical sourcing, clean tech integration, environmental restoration plans. It was everything investors were looking for. And the moment I hinted at federal contracts, without saying too much, they lined up. I'll never forget that first serious pitch meeting. A venture group out of Chicago sent 2 partners to meet at a nondescript office in Scottsdale. Ethan sat beside me in his usual composed, slightly smug way, while I walked them through the numbers. By the end, one of them leaned forward and said, "Who's really behind Solaris Core?" I smiled and shrugged. Someone who knows how to play the long game. They wired $25 million within 72 hours. That was just the beginning. Within 6 months, Solaris Core was valued at $1.2 billion. We'd signed contracts with 2 of the top EV manufacturers and a military supplier. A pilot facility was under construction. And still, no one knew it was me. Then came the article. "Cobalt Rush in the Desert" was the headline. Bloomberg ran it, detailing how a mysterious newcomer was shaking up the clean tech world with a game-changing discovery. I read the piece in my trailer at 2 a.m., half laughing, half holding my breath. The journalist even speculated about foreign influence due to the secrecy. No mention of the Caldwells. Not yet. But I knew it wouldn't take long. Marcus found out 2 weeks later. I knew because he called me. First time in over a year. "Aaron," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." I let the silence stretch. "Then, about what?" "About the land." Bingo. He'd made the connection. Probably traced the LLC or recognized something in the soil data from a leaked investor memo. Marcus was always good at piecing things together, just not fast enough. "That land belongs to Solaris Core now," I said calmly. "And it's legally protected. It was our family's asset." "No," I corrected him. "It was mine. Left to me, remember? In writing. I have the deed, Marcus. And more importantly, I have leverage." He tried to sue anyway. Claimed I'd misled the estate, that the land had hidden value that should have been part of the corporate trust. He brought in a team of lawyers. Tried to get a temporary injunction to freeze operations. Ethan eviscerated them. We had paper trails going back 2 years. Independent assessments. Chain of custody on every transaction. A sworn affidavit from the estate lawyer who read our parents' will. Ethan even found a clause Marcus himself had signed, confirming full awareness and acceptance of the asset distribution. The court dismissed the claim in under a week. But the best part? Marcus's move backfired. The publicity around the case exposed his involvement. His competitors started whispering. Investors got nervous. Rumors about mismanagement at Caldwell Systems started swirling. And Solaris Core. We kept building. I stayed hidden. Let the myth grow. To the outside world, Solaris Core was a miracle, an anonymous, well-run operation on the cutting edge of energy independence. But behind the scenes, I was finally building something on my own terms. No family name. No shadow looming over me. Just vision, execution, and grit. And while Marcus scrambled to hold on to the empire he'd inherited, I was creating one from scratch. I never intended to crush Marcus. That's the part no one ever believes. But the truth is, all I did was move forward. It was Marcus who spent every waking hour looking backward, trying to undo what I'd built. That's why he lost. He played defense. I built the future. By the time Solaris Core hit $2 billion in valuation, the media couldn't ignore it. Articles ran weekly. The quiet billion-dollar revolution in battery metals. Solaris Core, the company changing the EV supply chain. Analysts scrambled to figure out who was behind it. Speculation ranged from Elon Musk to Chinese conglomerates. I said nothing. Let the rumors swirl. Meanwhile, Marcus's empire began to crack. Caldwell Systems had grown complacent. Marcus doubled down on fossil fuel security contracts and outdated encryption software. He missed the pivot to decentralized storage. Laughed off renewable tech as a fad. The board meetings leaked online showed him shouting, red-faced, about tech hysteria. Investors started bailing. Then came the oil crash. 3 of Caldwell Systems' largest contracts were tied to fossil fuel logistics. When crude prices collapsed following a global shift to EV incentives, those contracts dried up. Overnight, their projected earnings dropped by 40%. Marcus's frantic attempts to pivot were too little, too late. He started liquidating assets. The Manhattan penthouse was the first to go. I saw the listing on a luxury real estate site one night while scrolling in bed. There it was, the same apartment where Marcus once told me, during a family dinner, that some people are visionaries, and some people are support staff. That memory still burned. I remembered the smug look on his face as he passed the wine and said, "Don't worry, Aaron. I'll help you find your lane someday." So I bought the penthouse. Quietly. Through an investment group I'd already seeded for real estate diversification. Ethan handled the paperwork. We used 2 layers of shell companies to ensure no name would trace back to me. The purchase closed in less than 30 days. I never stepped foot in it. Not once. 2 months later, I got a call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me it was him. "Aaron," he said. I know this is out of the blue, but I need a favor." His voice was hoarse, thinner than I remembered. Not the commanding presence I'd grown up tiptoeing around. "What kind of favor?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. I sold the penthouse." "Stupid move. Market's tighter than I expected. But now I need it back. The buyers haven't moved in. Maybe if you reached out on my behalf, we could." I cut him off. "You mean my penthouse?" Silence. "You bought it?" he asked, like someone waking from a bad dream. "Technically, one of my subsidiaries did. But yes." Another pause. Then a bitter laugh. "Of course. I should have known. You always were the patient one." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence speak. "Remember," I said slowly, "when you told me you'd help me find my lane, but only if I agreed to your terms? Interest, you called it." "That was years ago," he said. "We were kids." "No," I said, voice colder now. "We were adults. And I remember everything." His voice broke slightly. "So what now? You going to rub it in?" "I don't need to, Marcus. You're doing it to yourself." I hung up before he could respond. It wasn't revenge. It was symmetry. While Marcus's net worth plummeted, down 68% by the last report I saw, Solaris Core's influence only grew. We inked deals with 3 federal agencies, launched a battery recycling initiative, and opened a second processing plant in Nevada. We were no longer a startup. We were infrastructure. And still, no one knew my name. That was the best part. Watching my empire rise in the daylight while Marcus's legacy withered in the shadows. He kept grasping at relevance, issuing tone-deaf press releases and pitching outdated tech to desperate hedge funds. But the market had moved on. He was yesterday's visionary. I was tomorrow's. At some point, people started asking who owned the real estate group that bought the Caldwell penthouse. There were whispers. Speculation. But Ethan had been thorough. The paper trail was clean. And by then, even if Marcus did figure it out, there was nothing he could do. The Buildings Association had denied his application to repurchase. Not that he could have afforded it. Marcus wasn't the enemy. He was the lesson. The world had told me, over and over again, that I wasn't enough. Not hard enough, not ruthless enough, not Caldwell enough. But I didn't have to destroy him. I just had to outgrow him. They say the best revenge is living well. I disagree. The best revenge is being undeniable. Today, I stand at the helm of Solaris Core, one of the most strategic lithium and cobalt supply companies in the world. We're not just another mining firm, we're an ecosystem. From sustainable extraction to closed-loop battery recycling to next-gen materials R&D, we've redefined what clean energy infrastructure looks like. And we did it quietly. Purposefully. Until the day came when we didn't have to hide anymore. That day came when Forbes ran our profile on the cover. The mystery founder of the mineral revolution revealed, Aaron Caldwell's ascent. My inbox exploded. Some people were stunned. Others were furious. A few, very few, offered apologies wrapped in cowardice. But most just wanted something now that the masks were off. Partnerships. Interviews. Money. It wasn't until I read the article's final line, Caldwell proves that brilliance doesn't need a legacy. It just needs freedom, that I felt the full weight of what I'd done. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a shadow of someone else's story. I was the author now. The week after the article dropped, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the principal of my old high school. The same school where my last name was both a badge and a burden. The same place where teachers held me to Marcus's standard, constantly reminding me I was smart, in a different way. They asked if I'd come back to give the commencement speech. At first, I wanted to say no. Let someone else smile politely and hand out canned wisdom. But then I thought of the girl I used to be. The one who sat in the back of AP Calculus wondering if she was ever going to be enough. The one who got passed over for debate team captain even after winning every match because Marcus had been president before her. That girl deserved a moment. So I said yes. I walked onto the stage in a charcoal suit, minimalist jewelry, and boots caked with dust from our Arizona site. The gym was packed. Hundreds of students, teachers, parents, some of whom I recognized from years ago, older but just as sharp-eyed. When I stepped up to the podium, I didn't start with a joke. I didn't recite clichés. I told them a story. I wasn't supposed to be here, I said, voice steady. Not on this stage. Not at the top of any list. Not in the pages of business magazines or the rooms where decisions are made. I was the other Caldwell. The quiet one. The one who asked too many questions, cared about the wrong things, didn't fit the mold. They were listening now. I wasn't valedictorian. I didn't get into the Ivy League. I didn't inherit a company or a playbook. But what I did have was this: I tapped the mic gently, an ability to see something where others saw nothing. A patch of dirt in the desert. A dead end. I saw potential. I told them about the land. The warehouse. The discovery. The lie that looked like a loss. I didn't mention Marcus by name, but everyone who knew me knew who I meant. I was given nothing, I said. But I turned it into something. Because success isn't inherited. It's created. Especially by those the world tries to forget. There was a beat of silence. Then the applause. I don't cry easily. But when I walked off that stage and a girl with braces and a robotics club hoodie ran up to hug me, I felt something crack in the best possible way. Maybe I'd never been seen before. But I was seen now. And I was never going back. Marcus sent me a letter. Handwritten. The tone was different this time, less condescension, more regret. He said he'd been wrong. That he'd underestimated me. That maybe I'd earned what I had after all. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed anything from him. Not approval. Not closure. Not even a conversation. I had outgrown the need to be right. My legacy wasn't a company. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't a net worth or a keynote speech. It was the fact that I had built something with my own hands, on my own land, using the instincts they all said were naive. I look around now, at our new tech campus, at the young engineers we're mentoring, at the policy panels asking for my input, and I see a different world than the one I came from. A world where the underestimated are rising. Where quiet girls in back rows are designing the next revolution. I don't need Marcus. I don't need their legacy. I have my own now, built on grit, vision, and the one thing they never gave me. Belief in myself.